good vibrations.
Well, these days, any show that doesn't address the C word, the obvious, is a revolutionary act in itself. And I'm always happy to deal with subjects other than that. So this show ties in with my original and specialist area of interest and research, which is the true nature of the music industry, what it's really used for, and those key figures who populate it, many of the household names and one or two lifetime actors. And my guest today has been kind enough to tell me that my work through Musical Truth Volume 1 inspired him to go down this particular route. We're going to be talking about the group Pink Floyd, one of the best known rock bands in history today. And my guest is Martin Brown. Welcome along, Martin.
Hello, Mark.
So just give us a bit of background in terms of what led you to the point that you wanted to delve into this research, into Pink Floyd, and what made you decide to take a deep dive into this particular group.
Well, I first listened to Pink Floyd in the late 1970s when my brother and sister used to play the Animals album and The Wall when it first came out. I've been listening to Pink Floyd since I was about 4 or 5 years old. I've been a musician for about 30 years now, and 8 years of that I spent playing in a Pink Floyd tribute show. I was Roger Waters. I was the bass guitarist and the vocalist. My background is mainly in university and academic studies. I spent 9 years in university from 93 to 2002. And since then, I've been discovering that the world is is not really well disposed to people who might take other people's jobs. It's a strange old thing. But I've been writing poetry as well. You could say my awakening came about a dozen years ago. I'd sort of figured out that the world is perhaps not what we think it is. I'm one of those people with a rebellious mind. I just ask questions all the time. You know, why is this the way it is? What's happening there? And I never got satisfactory answers to that. So I started all of this through 9/11. I decided to take a look at 9/11 one day, and I thought, hello, this is a big scam, isn't it? And then I looked at more of that, and I looked at Kennedy, and then I got into the work of David Icke, and then I found out there's a huge load going on in music as well. So I read David McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and I read your two Musical Truth books, and I thought, this explains a lot. So here I am.
Yeah, well, the world is just a little bit different to what we're told it is, it turns out. And this applies to the music industry just as much as to any other walk of life. So the material you've pulled together on Pink Floyd, you're going to be using, I believe, to hopefully put out a book in due course. And this will be a very different book to any that have gone before on the Floyd, right?
Yeah, the Floyd is, well, the history of Pink Floyd is basically a mythology. Like most of the entertainment industry, like the music industry in particular, but Pink Floyd especially, it's a mythology. If you look at any, you don't have to buy books. You can just look at any sort of hour-long documentary made on Pink Floyd in the last 25, 30 years, and you'll get the same sort of story. It's the waypoints that you get to. There's the Cambridge background. There's Syd Barrett, the acid casualty. There's Dark Side of the Moon. There's Syd turning up at the studio during Wish You Were Here. There's the flying pig escaping from Battersea Power Station. There's Roger going mad and building his wall. Then there's Roger going even more mad and arguing with everyone. And then there's the rejuvenation of Pink Floyd in the late 80s and the 90s with David Gilmour at the helm of it. And then there's the reunion at Live 8 in 2005, and it's the same story told, and it's these waypoints, and there are a series of myths. All of these events, even those big ones that I've just outlined there, they can be questioned, and there are many other stories, lesser stories in the big Pink Floyd mythology, which can be questioned, and it leaves you wondering what's the actual truth about this band. We're not left with much. But I went on a big dig with this. I think I've identified about 30 odd Pink Floyd books, books literally about Pink Floyd and different aspects of it, and there's a load more information in there, and it makes interesting reading, and there's a much bigger picture, and a picture that very much ties in with your work and the work of Dave McGowan. That is the fact that at the back of all of this music, at the back of this band, as well as all the other band, there's this element of manipulation. There's military intelligence in the background. There's the same old academic institutions. A lot of the same figures crop up in the background. So it is Floyd fits the template, if you want to put it that way.
Well, the style of research that McGowan did for his book, and which I followed up with Musical Truth, is basically taking information that's already in the public domain. So McGowan didn't do any original interviews for Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. He just took magazine articles, newspaper reports, obituaries, old video footage from the time, and pieced his story together from that. And that's pretty much what I did with Musical Truth. And I think that's what you've done to a large extent with your research here. So there's an approved narrative, the Wikipedia version of Pink Floyd, which just gets repeated over and over again. It's like an echo chamber. All these different authors just put out the same aspects of the band, as you've said. But there's a whole load of other information that is there if you've got the will to find it and if you do a bit of digging. I think that's been the basis of what you've done there, isn't it?
Yeah. I've currently read, God knows how many books over the last 8 months. Over 100 anyway. And I've been finding bits of Floyd in different places and piecing together what I'd like to call a history of Pink Floyd as opposed to a mythology. Although, as I've said, Pink Floyd is one of those amorphous things. Once you think you've got hold of it, someone else has come up with something else, and it's hard to get hold of Pink Floyd, even though you would have thought, with them being a huge band, you'd have a lot of information on them. But there is a lot of information out there, but a lot of it's repeated, and this is where the mythology comes from. Like what Dave McGowan did, he identified the same things cropping up all the time. These bands which were not sort of they didn't have the backgrounds that you'd expect going into bands.
Yeah.
There's the Floyd have a very posh background. All of them, they're very, very posh, if not aristocratic.
Yeah.
I haven't finished the genealogical digging on it yet, but it would appear that they're all linked into what I'd call the ruling class. The people who go who have a certain background, a certain family background. You might call it bloodlines. And these people are put into the public school system, and then they're churned through that into Oxbridge colleges, and then from there they're moved into different key aspects of society.
That's right.
I've sort of identified that, this is what I call the ruling class. Other people could call it other things, but I'll call it the ruling class. It operates at this level. It's not the high up stuff like the cabal, the real people who are running the show. These are kind of like the functionaries. These are the people who head up. They end up headmasters of these public schools and lecturers in academia. They end up as heads on TV. They end up as the heads of company.
And they end up as prominent rock stars, evidently, as well. And they're not backgrounds that you'd expect necessarily for a rock band. I've made the comment many times that when you look at rock bands, I would expect to find people coming from working class backgrounds, dads who were labourers, miners, construction workers, lorry drivers, this kind of thing. But more often than not, you find the dads were politicians, diplomats, lecturers, professors, came out of military intelligence, aspects of the government. You found that with McGowan's story coming out of Laurel Canyon, and you find it with many British groups as well. And Pink Floyd is a very good example of background you wouldn't necessarily expect rock stars to have.
You're absolutely tripping over people like that in the story of Pink Floyd. Not just the members of the band, but also the managers, their friends and acquaintances, what I call the Pink Floyd entourage, all those people who help the huge Pink Floyd thing to happen. And you can't get away with it. You can't get away from it. It's very it's very much steeped in all of this stuff that you and Dave McGowan have identified as generic to not only rock and roll but the entertainment industry at large.
It seems it's all kept in very close circles.
Oh yes. I mean, there's a lot of nepotism goes on, and the old boy network, the old school tie.
Absolutely.
A lot. You find that someone's promoted to something. They get a gig, they get a recording contract. They're in the right place at the right time, and you find that one of these people in the network has made sure that they're there at the time. You can't prove anything, anything's going on, but you see it happening time and time and time again.
Yeah.
And it's a big pattern. One thing I found with what I call the ruling class is that one arm does all the dirty work, the stuff up front. They're the politicians, the people who push policies. They're the people who run companies. All of these sort of dark suit professions, if you want to call it that. The other part is the entertainment industry, which basically provides a diversion away from all the people who we should be looking at and should be holding to account for all this stuff.
That's right. And they would want those roles in very trusted hands, which is why they create the heroes of that scene and they hand these careers to them. It seems these groups are hand-picked for that kind of role, whether it's the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Who or Pink Floyd in this case. Let's take it back to the very start of the group, though, because looking them up on Wikipedia, it says that they formed out of London in 1965. But there's a very strong Cambridge connection, isn't there? I think Syd Barrett came out of Cambridge, and you'll be able to tell me what the other links to Cambridge are there. But they very quickly became darlings of the psychedelic counterculture scene of London in the mid to late 1960s. They were playing all the key clubs and they were very much a part of helping shape and mould that whole scene. So they became prominent very quickly after their formation, didn't they? Which could be said to have been quite a stroke of luck. Yeah.
Well, Pink Floyd came out of London in 1965. Well, no, they didn't. Pink Floyd were a Cambridge band. This is the mythology. Pink Floyd called Pink Floyd. The band actually called Pink Floyd. Syd Barrett, Richard Wright, Nick Mason, and Roger Waters. they did form into that lineup, which is the first classic lineup, in London in 1965. The origins of Pink Floyd go back further than that, and this is the different narrative of Pink Floyd. I've traced Pink Floyd back to at least November 1961, where Roger Waters and Syd Barrett are on a train. They've been to see a Gene Vincent gig in London, and they're travelling back to Cambridge on the train. And Roger and Syd come up with this plan, and they say the story goes that they decided that when they went up to London to college, they'd both start a band together. And this is in November '61, and this plan seems to be a feature of the early years of Pink Floyd, because I think, I can't prove it outright, but there's lots of evidence to suggest that all four members of Pink Floyd had their spots saved for them in the band, come hell or high water, right from as soon as they all met up. Because you look at this deal they did on the train, and they decided, we'll do this, we'll do a band when we go to London to college. Now they didn't know they were going to college in London in November '61. Roger might have known, because he has a very unusual 1961. Roger does. He goes travelling to the Middle East in the summer of 1961. Him and a guy called Andrew Rawlinson, who are both schoolmates. Now Roger's 17 in the summer of '61. They're planning to drive to Baghdad for some reason. Now this is the hippie trail they're going on. Roger gets his mother's car. They jump in it. They're apparently on some kind of drug to keep them awake, and they drive through France and Italy and Greece and Turkey and down to Beirut. Now at Beirut they go their separate ways, and Andrew Rawlinson carries on to Baghdad, presumably in the car, and Roger hitchhikes back from Beirut. Now, what
like
on earth?
you do?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're getting strangeness here already, aren't you? You're sensing the weirdness of all this stuff.
Well, Beirut puts me in mind of the Copeland family, who I've mentioned in my books. Yeah. This is the group The Police came out of the Copeland family. Miles Copeland was a CIA agent. He had 3 sons. One of them was Stuart Copeland, who co-formed the band The Police with the other 2 members. And the Copeland brothers grew up in Beirut and were educated there. It's part of Miles Copeland's CIA posting in that part of the world. So when you mention Beirut, that's the first thing I think of.
Yeah, I also think of Mark David Chapman, the assassin of John Lennon, who also worked in Beirut in the mid-70s, and apparently had something to do with the CIA there.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking my suspicious mind is kind of going down Beirut, big CIA centre. And also a big drug running centre, because Lebanon was a big producer of hash at the time, and it was also one of the main routes of smuggling drugs out of the Lebanon and through Turkey, Greece, and across Europe to Paris, London, and Amsterdam. So,
what do we know about Roger Waters' father? Because the father's profession often tells us so much.
Yeah, well, Roger's father, very, very, very famously, Roger Waters' father was Eric Fletcher Waters, who he immortalises as a fallen war hero. He died at Anzio in February 1944, just not long after Roger had been born. His profession was he was a teacher. He taught physical education and religious education as a schoolmaster, and he got a special commission into the Royal Fusiliers. I think it was the City of London Royal Fusiliers, which might be interesting. But before that, he was a conscientious objector. So a bit of a, he was a communist and a conscientious objector. And then suddenly he was serving as an ambulance driver in the Blitz. And then he seemed to have a change of heart, and he got himself a commission. So I mean, do schoolmasters get commissions? Well, apparently, if you're religiously inclined, if you have a strong religion and you're a very fit person, those two things combined give you a distinct advantage in that. Whether he had a social advantage or not, I don't really think so, because a lot of Roger's paternal background goes back into the north of England. His grandfather was a coal miner from Durham, and he was killed in World War One. He was a sapper. He used to do all the mining underneath the enemy trenches, and they'd plant all these explosives and blow the shit out of the countryside. And he died. We're not sure how he died, but I think he died in about 1915 on the Western Front. And I've looked back into Roger's paternal side, back to the late 18th century, and it seems to be full of miners and farm workers and cobblers and a variety of people, sort of working class people from the north.
Yeah.
His maternal side, which is always the interesting one, it seems, in genealogy. His maternal side's more interesting because you sent me Roger's maternal family tree, didn't you?
Somebody had sent it to me, yeah, so I passed it on to you.
Yeah, and Roger appears to have his maternal origins in the Brereton family from Cheshire.
That's right.
And that comes down to his mother, Mary White, and I think her mother or grandmother was actually she was a Royston, who are the Viscounts Royston of Cambridgeshire. Now, the Viscounts Royston are the eldest sons of the Earls of Hardwicke. An interesting note on them is that in the mid-70s, the one of the daughters of, I think it was the 8th Earl of Hardwicke, married a guy called Nigel Weymouth. Now, Nigel Weymouth was one of the poster designers for a company called Haps, Hash and the Coloured Coat, who provided posters for the UFO Club, where Pink-Floyd were the resident band up to 1967. So by the mid-70s, Roger Waters was actually related through the aristocracy to this guy who used to do the posters for his gigs almost a decade earlier.
Doesn't Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac connect into the Brereton line as well somewhere?
Yes. There are three famous people who come out of the Brereton line. Is Roger Waters, Mick Fleetwood, the drummer with Fleetwood Mac, and also the actor Jeremy Irons. So
they're all related.
Yeah. Although, albeit distantly, and I've gone through so much of this stuff I've just been doing the free stuff so far on the genealogical things. To get all the complete information or a lot more, you have to sign up to all the websites.
Sure.
So that's going to be a solid month's work on those websites.
Yeah, no doubt. One of Roger's marriages is interesting, isn't it? Didn't he marry a woman from the aristocracy in the 70s?
Yes, in 1976 he married Lady Caroline Christie, who was the daughter of, I think, the third Marquis of Zetland. She, the Marquis of Zetland is interesting because I think his father, I think the first or second Marquis of Zetland, was a member of the Milner Group back at the beginning of the 20th century, and Caroline Christie, her previous husband, was Robert Rock Scully, who was the manager of the Grateful Dead. So
connections just keep on coming.
Yeah, I mean, if you want red flags, you can open up your own franchise of semaphore shops. There's so many of them.
Absolutely,
it's incredible. But
when you say that Pink Floyd came out of Cambridge, then are we talking connections to Cambridge University or just the town of Cambridge?
There are quite a few connections to Cambridge University. David Gilmour's father, Douglas Gilmour, he was I think senior lecturer in zoology and professor of genetics at Cambridge University. Syd Barrett's father, Arthur Max Barrett, he was a lecturer in morbid anatomy at Cambridge University. Goodness me, I think was it Syd Barrett's mother or Syd Barrett's mother and Roger Waters' mother knew each other, and I think they used to teach art classes at Homerton College in Cambridge. So there's a lot of Cambridge University connections there. And they go out further and further into the Pink Floyd entourage, but those are the direct ones related to the band.
So the group established themselves in London, as we've said, during this swinging period, the 60s counterculture. So you had all the flower power hippie scene going on in California, and at the same time you had swinging London, and you had Pink Floyd, a major part of that psychedelic scene. They were playing at the UFO Club. I think they played the original Marquee Club as well, didn't they?
Yeah.
And what was going on in London is largely an untold story, because whenever you get accounts of that period in history, it always focuses on America and what was going on there. But there's a writer, researcher, Matt Sergiu, who's a good friend of mine. He runs the Occult Beatles site, and he's really taken a deep dive into the London counterculture of these times. And Pink Floyd has popped up a few times in his research as well. I think you two have compared notes, haven't you? Yes,
we've emailed back and forth. Matt's put me in touch with quite a few interesting things. The first time the Pink Floyd name was used was in 1965, when the four of them ended up in the band. Largely, we don't really know why they were in the band, but unless you want to say that they were put there for a purpose. Now, that there's a good argument to be made for that, because if you look at the shows that were put on at UFO, and you look at the concerts that Pink Floyd were involved in, and the ones they put on where they were the only band playing, they very much resemble a cross between Timothy Leary's guided LSD sessions, which he used to do with the League for Spiritual Discovery, LSD, at Millbrook in New York, and also Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters acid tests, which were happening in San Francisco on the other side of the country at the same time. Yeah. So it seems like Pink Floyd are almost conducting their own acid tests in London, or they're at least providing the music and the light show for it, because whether you're looking at the acid tests, or whether you're looking at Leary's guided LSD sessions, you've got a certain amount of elements to them. You have the music, whether it's live or not. I think Leary used to play different records. The Kesey and the Merry Pranksters had the Grateful Dead playing. This would be combined with light shows, and they were kind of like liquid slides, very very similar to what the Floyd were using in the early days.
Acid everywhere.
Well, to a certain, in America there was, yes, but there's also the acid tests were trying to simulate an acid trip without the acid. So what Kesey would do he had a bowl of Kool-Aid with acid in it. He'd have a bowl of ordinary Kool-Aid. So one was for the ones who wanted to try it. One was for the ones who didn't want to try it. But everybody appeared to be having the same experience, because all of these different aspects were in there. And you can see this happening in London as well, because they say that at UFO they used to give sugar cubes to people on the door, and most of the time they say, well, perhaps not, but it would appear that the consensus of opinion is that sometimes it had acid in it, most of the times it didn't. So it appears that all these different aspects of these shows, the live music, the light show, the film shows, the spoken words, the tape effects, and all the other avant-garde things going on at the time, they were all there to create a similar experience of an acid.
Yeah, a cocktail of influences. In Musical Truth Volume 2, I drew comparisons between that 60s counterculture psychedelic scene and all the influences there with the later acid house rave scene that came out of the UK in the late 80s. Oh, yeah. And that was very much centred around Ibiza in terms of the official myth of how that whole scene got started. And in conversations with Matt, he mentioned that the Floyd were connected to Ibiza early on in the 60s. I think there was a documentary film and they provided the soundtrack to it. But what you're talking about there, you've got all the different elements affecting people that turned up to these music clubs. The sonic soundscape, the drugs, the visuals, the consciousness of the crowd, and all of those elements are present one generation on in the acid house rave scene, which came to become the worldwide dance music phenomenon that we have now. So those two scenes certainly seem to be connected to me. But what was that connection between Pink Floyd and Ibiza? Just remind me.
Ibiza is on the hippie trail. There's basically two hippie trails in Europe. There's one coming from the east, which we've seen with Roger Waters' trip to Beirut, and there's another one going from Tangier through the Balearic Islands and up through the ports in the south of France and up to Paris, Amsterdam and London. And Floyd seem to enjoy going to Ibiza. They do it quite a lot. And the film that you referred to is a film called More. It's by the director Barbet Schroeder. And Barbet Schroeder created this film about it's a drug. It's almost like a tourist film for Ibiza. There's some wonderful shots of Ibiza and everything there, but it's also a kind of cliched hippie drug story. And they they start off on light drugs, and then the guy ends up dying of a heroin overdose. And Pink Floyd did the soundtrack for it. Now that was in 1969. Prior to that, Pink Floyd had been on. They seem to go on holiday to Ibiza quite a bit. I'm not sure if there's if there's anything more nefarious going on there with regard to it also being on the drugs route, because people used to pick up Moroccan hash called kif and smuggle it through the Balearic Islands, particularly Ibiza and Formentera, and then it'd head up towards the Western European capitals. But they are very much associated with all of that, and bizarrely enough, they send the band off to Ibiza in August '67 to recuperate from their burnout. They're suffering from nervous exhaustion, according to the press release. And so if you're saying that Syd Barrett zonked out on acid in the middle of '67, why send him to Ibiza?
Well, he didn't last much longer in the band, did he? I think
No.
April '68 he left the band, and the story we get is that he basically fried his brains with too much LSD, and his behaviour had become erratic, and he was unpredictable and unreliable. So the band had to move on without him, and they brought Dave Gilmour in. Syd didn't die for many more years. He died in 2006, aged 60. But evidently the rest of his life wasn't a barrel of laughs, because he suffered from all kinds of mental illness. Do we have any further insights into what may have really happened to Syd Barrett?
I think with Syd Barrett, you've got four options of what might have happened to Syd Barrett, and the truth probably lies in a combination of two or more of them. It's simplistic. It's overly simplistic to say that Syd just fried his brains on acid, because we have a lot of stories about Syd, and apparently he's zonked out on acid, and he's doing daft things. But a lot of these stories have either been debunked, or they can only be partly true, and that calls into question all the other ones. You're questioning, well, what about these stories as well? So it's quite difficult to say. Syd apparently did take acid. I think it's pretty certain that Syd took acid, but he probably took a fair bit of it at different times. But whether he was an acid casualty or not is very debatable, I think. The thing about Syd's stories is that they change with fashion, with the fashion of the age. If you look at Floyd documentaries from the 90s, where it was cooler to emphasize sort of like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll angle. There, Syd's taking all these drugs, and he's living the high rock and roll lifestyle, and it's acceptable to do that, and it's a bit cool, and that's the story that we're given. And these days, the fashion is for a more sort of touchy-feely approach. We're not so up on the sort of high living side of it, because we've taken a moral stand, haven't we, these days? And it seems that his stories changed with fashion. So these days, it seems that one of the favoured stories about Syd is that he was suffering from mental health problems. It's been mentioned that his father suffered from bipolar disorder. His sister has suggested that Syd might have been suffering from Asperger's, and Roger Waters has become the cheerleader for the story about Syd being a schizophrenic. Now, if the story of Syd changes with the fashions of the time, then how much truth is there in it? You know, is it a true story, or are they just giving us what they think we want to hear at any one time? Now, with regard to schizophrenia, which is your second option, you think, well, okay, there's a good there's a good way of testing this. Was Syd ever diagnosed as a schizophrenic? Because he went into psychiatric hospital, and you know they looked at him, but according to his family, at least, I think his nephew Ian Barrett has said that he was never diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and he said that the hospital regarded Syd as an eccentric, not as having any kind of mental disorder. So that's a bit of a problem if you're going to say he's a schizophrenic. But if you go on schizophrenia.com, which you'd expect to be, you know, with that sort of a that sort of a URL, you'd expect it to have some kind of cachet in medicine. You'd expect it to have some kind of background, and it has an essay there claiming Syd as one of its own, Syd Barrett as a schizophrenic. So I was interested in this. So I read this article all the way down, and I was looking for the references and the proof and everything. And the one proof they had, the one person they quoted for as evidence for Syd being a schizophrenic was Roger Waters. Now, what on earth is schizophrenia doing? Schizophrenia.com doing? Quoting a musician giving some kind of medical diagnosis?
Well, you know, Bill Gates is the leading voice in medicine and health these days, and he's a bloody software computer guy, so why not, you know? I mean, who cares about actual qualifications in science and medicine? So after Syd's departure, the sound and the style of the group changed immensely, so they pretty much left behind the psychedelic style that they were first known for, and then they moved towards Dark Side of the Moon and, you know, the progressive rock sound of the 70s. Was that largely due to the influence of Dave Gilmour being in the group, do you think, or was it felt that Syd was representative of that early era, and with him gone, they just wanted to change their whole sound? Or do you think instructions may have come down to them to start doing something different?
I think that the change in the musical style is very much dependent on the difference between the way Syd Barrett and David Gilmour play the guitar. Although to start off with, Gilmour actually tried to do a Syd Barrett impression. He said this. He said he was trying to copy what Syd was doing in order to continue the career. But once, you know, they're in a bit of a limbo and at the end of the 60s, because they relied so much on Syd for the songwriting and to be the leader of the band on stage that, you know, they had to figure out what else to do. They got Dave Gilmour in, who's a better technical guitarist than Syd Barrett, but he has a very different style. So as far as it went, Gilmour had to do an impression of Syd Barrett. But then it started to change a lot, because David Gilmour started to develop his own style in the way he played the guitar. So I think that's the main reason the music changed, and the other reasons would be the fact that Roger took over as the main songwriter, and Richard Wright, the keyboardist, started writing, and Gilmour started writing a bit later on. But the guitar style, the songwriting style, and the vocal style of the band were changed simply through that change of personnel. I'm not sure whether it was actual orders. You have to play like this now. I'm not sure if that happened.
Yeah.
I think they were just kind of left in limbo because the management left them. They went with Syd, Peter Jenner and Andrew King. They thought there was no mileage left in Pink Floyd without Syd Barrett, because he was the songwriter, he was the front man, and
well, there were some other groups that emerged at the same time as Pink Floyd's, playing a similar style of music. One would be Status Quo, when they first came out, with pictures of Matchstick Men and Ice in the Sun and songs like this, very psychedelic, very trippy. And then they went down this blues sort of, rock and blues route that they're best known for. Then you had Mark Bolan and Tyrannosaurus Rex, who were making these whimsical, folksy kind of magical songs back in the hippie era. And then they went off down the electric boogie sort of glam rock route. So a lot of these groups changed their style from those initial days. They certainly weren't alone in that. So according to official law, there's been this rift between Gilmour and Waters, sort of on and off through the years. And you had Richard Wright leaving the group, and then Roger Waters left, and then Wright came back, and then they eventually reunited for Live 8. But the impression that the public is left with is that Gilmour and Waters could never see eye to eye. They had creative differences and all this. Do you think there's anything more to them not being able to work together, or is it just a straight case of personality clashes?
Well, they do. There may be something more to it. I think Roger has had sort of a, as the leader of the band in the 70s, Roger had a love-hate relationship with the system. I'm getting the impression that he's at one minute he's doing what they want, the next minute he's rebelling against it. Then they're bringing him back in line, and they're influencing him again. And then he gets out of line again.
Do you think that's sincere rebellion, or is it contrived in any way?
I don't know. Roger does strike me as sort of like a passionate, sincere person, but when you get onto the subject of Roger as a truther and as an activist and everything, what he essentially says isn't sort of addressing any of the hot points of the conspiracy, if you want to put it that way. He never gets into the really sensitive stuff. He's working within the left-right political paradigm. He's having a go at Trump and getting onto that thing where it's sort of dividing people. And so
he's best known for his Israel-Palestine stance, isn't he? Really, he's most controversial for that.
Yeah. The BDS thing. He's him and Nick Mason as well. They've been encouraging people not to play in Israel because of because of what they're doing there. And he's flying close to the wind there. But what can you do with Roger Waters? He's just cancelled a tour which is called "This Is Not a Drill." So I mean that. I don't, in this context, I don't think that title does him any favours. But
raises some eyebrows, doesn't it?
Yeah, he is a difficult person to get along with, though. But they all are. Gilmour's a very difficult person to get along with. They have this sort of stubborn English diffidence about them that it's all rather posh. It's like we don't have fist fights on stage like the Davis brothers in the Kinks or the Everly brothers. We have awkward silences, and we don't talk to each other for a while, and we do stuff behind the scenes and undermine each other. It's all a bit like that. So
just makes you wonder what they would be doing if they'd never become rock musicians. Would they be investment bankers or lecturers or lawyers?
Well, Roger would have probably been quite a good architect because he was studying architecture, and I think Roger's the kind of person, although he was never an academic person, he was a very, very smart person. I think he would have been a very good architect. He'd do anything that he'd set his mind to because he was very strong-willed. As for David Gilmour, he would have probably continued being a musician at whatever level he could find. because he'd been a professional musician from right back in the early 60s. He'd been touring around with bands. He'd been to Europe touring with a band, and I think he was sort of he'd thrown his lot in with that sort of thing. Although when Floyd picked him up in late '67, he hadn't got a band, and he was I think he was a van driver for Ozzy Clark, and his the fashion designer bloke. So I mean, who would have known? I think Gilmour would have got back into music, and he would have probably done a good job because he's a good musician. But they wouldn't be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Put it that way, if they hadn't been in Pink Floyd.
Yeah, just wonder why they were all brought together like that with their given their backgrounds.
Yes, it's very unlikely, isn't it? They were all. It seems that they were all brought together through the Regent Street Polytechnic. They all ended up. Well, not all of them. Syd wasn't, but Syd was younger than them. Roger and Nick Mason and Richard Wright all ended up at the Regent Street Polytechnic at the same time, doing an architecture course. Now, you ask the question, why on earth are they studying architecture? Do they have some kind of predisposition to that? Did they like it? Well, no, they didn't. Roger Waters was advised to go to the Regent Street Polytechnic to do architecture by the National Institute of Industrial Psychology. Was he reading Orwell's 1984 at the time?
It puts me in mind of Queen and how that band formed out of Art College in Ealing. Brian May and Roger Taylor were studying there. They met Freddie Mercury and put the band together, and they were all quite posh as well, with academic backgrounds. Brian May's a bloody astrophysicist these days, so it's another band of posh boys. Yes,
I think it would be safe to suggest that a lot of these people who were posh and couldn't make it to Oxbridge to be part of military intelligence or the other highfalutin stuff, they were dumped into art colleges, and all the creative ones were put into art colleges, and they were sort of manoeuvred into different places. So some would be photographers, some would be artists, some would be fashion designers, some would be musicians, and all of these different aspects had a huge effect on 60s counterculture. So it was probably, the art colleges were probably used as a bit of a melting pot where you put all these people together, see how it went, and worked from there.
Yeah,
that might be an idea.
Just thinking of Roger Waters' extracurricular activities then, he's like to pipe up about various political causes and issues. He's usually got something to say about stuff that's going on. I think he's even made public comments about bloody COVID-19, if I'm not mistaken. Do you get the impression that he's kind of permitted to have his say to a certain degree, and that it is sincere, it's coming from his heart, and it's what he really thinks, but he can overstep the mark, and there are points where he has to be reined back in and advised not to speak about certain subjects? Do you get that kind of impression?
Yeah, he certainly has to be reined back in and everything, because you can see that happening all the way back to the 70s. It seems like he does Dark Side of the Moon, and he's the golden boy. Everyone loves him because he's making them lots of money, and then the band's in the doldrums after that, wondering what the hell to do next, and then he takes charge of the Wish You Were Here album sessions, and suddenly there's a load of criticism of the music industry in it, which sounded to a lot of people like biting the hand that feeds you. So after that, his marriage is breaking up at the same time as he's doing that album, and the year after the Wish You Were Here album, he marries Caroline Christie, who is the ex-wife of the manager of the Grateful Dead and part of the aristocracy. Perhaps he was being nudged back into line a little by being directed down that route. I don't know. It seems that a lot of these, a lot of the women involved in all of these stories have quite a bit of influence behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of research to be done on the women behind these famous male musicians. People like Marianne Faithfull and Linda Eastman and Yoko Ono and Patti Boyd to take the most famous examples.
Yeah.
But they were highly influential, and perhaps that was the way to nudge Roger back into line. But it didn't seem to have worked, because when he wrote Animals, he was even more vicious towards the establishment. And what happened after Animals was that Pink Floyd almost went bankrupt, because they'd invested all their money in with a financial company called Norton Warburg. Another red flag.
The Warburg banking dynasty.
Well, I'm not sure if Andrew Warburg was related to them, but it's not a common name, is it? And he's dealing in the financial sector. But apparently Norton Warburg invested Floyd's money in all sorts of ridiculous things like pizza shops and taxi companies and skateboard companies and security companies and things like that. And apparently they lost millions of the Floyd's money for them, with that. And plus, the Floyd were hit by the tax man in the same year. This is 1978. They were hit by the tax man, who wanted them to pay tax on money that they'd never even seen. So, although the actual members of Pink Floyd were probably still afloat financially at the time, they still had their country houses and their cars and their yachts and their villas in Rhodes and everything. But the band Pink Floyd was in a bit of financial trouble. So that's pushing them on to do The Wall. And Roger does The Wall as a 3-part project to maximise the financial mileage out of it. There's a double album, there's the tour, and there's the film. So I think all that financial collapse is nudging him back in as well. And he goes off reservation with the final cut as well, because he's bashing away at Thatcher and Reagan and all those people in the Final Cut album in '83. And after that, he's pushed the others out of the way by then. He's frustrated because the others can't keep up with him, with his writing. He's written the next album. He goes to the others and say, "Have you got any material?" "Well, no, not really." "Well, what have you been doing for the last 2 years?" "Well, I've been sailing my yacht around the Aegean, And Roger was getting thoroughly annoyed with it all. So he just took on the project of the Final Cut, and he does stick the boot in on politics. Yes, it's the left-right paradigm again, but after that he leaves the band. So is that is that another agreement? Are all these arguments, to get back to a point you made a couple of hours ago, perhaps you asked me and I never got round to an answer, this thing between Gilmour and Waters, perhaps that was there to get Waters out of the band, because hey, we don't want this guy going feral and running riot and saying whatever he wants. And then when Gilmour takes over the band and he does the next couple of albums, it's very much a harking back to the nice sort of the nice mellifluous sounding Pink Floyd from the early 1970s.
The comfortably numb Pink Floyd.
They are comfortably numb, yes.
Yeah.
I call it past Floyd.
Yeah.
Because not only that, but he gets in all the old people to play as well. In in the later in the Gilmore tours, he gets Dick Parry back in to play the saxophone. Now, Dick Parry played the saxophone on Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon, so he's getting him back in. Walters shunted him out. There was no saxophone on Animals or The Wall, and he got Ralph Ravenscroft to play the saxophone on the final cut. But Gilmore's getting all the old crew back in. He's got Storm Thorgerson back in to do the album cover design. He's another one of the Cambridge Mafia from the school days back then. And so you can see Gilmore bringing in the Cambridge lot again. It's like a restoration of what Floyd was before.
Yeah, old boys club.
Yeah, they got rid of the rebel.
Yeah.
If you want to look at Roger Waters that way. I mean, it's still, the jury's still out.
All right, Martin. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. But
Right.
what are your plans to do? What do you plan to do with all this stuff that you've collated? You're swimming in an ocean of notes there that you've gathered from various places. So is the intention to bring this all together in a book? And if so, do you have any kind of timescale in mind as to when that might drop?
Yes, the book is currently half written, and the research is about 3/4 of the way done. So, yes.
Do you have a title for it?
Not yet. No, I'm going to write a load of possibilities down on a piece of paper and pick from the best one. I want to make the title quite good, but not cliche.
Dark Side of the Floyd.
Dark Side of the Floyd. Oh dear. You can feel me cringing through the screen, can't you?
Well, I just thought of that one on the spot.
Yeah, but yes, I mean, there's lots of Floyd lyrics you can choose from. But yes, when it'll be finished, I'm looking at August or September. So all being well, so that'll be available from the evil Bezos, or you can email me. I'll do an email alternative deal for people.
Sure, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, sooner than I thought then.
Yes.
A few months down the line.
Yeah, because it's all, all of it's in my head. I just have to tap away at the keyboard for a couple of months. That's pretty much it.
That's what it's like with my books as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's all up there. You just got to get it down on the page.
Yeah. The life of the long distance writer.
That's right. Have you got any of your work online in the meantime, or are you just entirely new to this whole game?
I've published books of poetry, which you can also find on Amazon. I did as a dry run to test out the self-publishing thing on Amazon. I brought out new editions of my old poetry. I did a collected edition and a new book. So they're available on Amazon, or you can email me if you want a book, and I've got a deal for you which will work in the UK.
Okay, well, I'll put your email address in the show notes, and then a bit nearer the time when the book is due to drop, maybe we can speak again then. Yeah,
I'll have a lot more good stuff for you by then, hopefully.
Sure. But for now then, thanks for coming on today. Fascinating chat.
Okay. This is just a
Vibrations, I'm picking up vibrations, I'm picking up good vibrations, I'm picking up